We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From the hills of Strawberry Canyon, I'm Coin Dang, and this is the Golden Bear Cast. Let's go. Go Bears.
And welcome back to another episode of the California Golden Bear Cast, a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Rob Huang. Joined by me, of course, is my co-host, Andy Johnston. We have two more guests on the show today. You can probably tell in the description. But the reason I'm kind of hurrying through all this is because we have a lot to talk about and not enough time. So we want to get in as much info and discussion as possible for all you listeners out there and all the Cal fans out there listening. If you're not a Cal fan listening, then even better. But alongside the two of us is we have Nick Kranz from Ride for California, of course. Hey. And we also have Nam Lay from The Crepe and also a writer of Ride for California.
Yeah, we do
with the Sunday novel
split jersey thing over here. You know, like
a house divided.
I've been employed by every Cal site in existence over the last 10 years in some capacity. So happy to be here.
Well, except for you squirted sriracha on our Ride for California sweater. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you for that one.
Listen, it was an accident. It was, nobody plans on these things, Rob.
That was probably the bad omen that led to Saturday. It really was. It really was. All right. But the reason we're all here today is we're going to talk a little about Washington State and probably more about the repercussions of the game. But all of us are kind of on different parts of the spectrum in terms of the fallout that happened Saturday night after the game. There's the huge variety of takes, right? From people wanting everyone gone, from people still believing in the staff and giving them another year, to people who are ambivalent, to people saying this is Cal and who we are, we just have to live by it. But this is the Cal one sector of the Cal football brain trust out of the bloggers. So we're all here, and so let's start with just the broad where your stance is after the Washington State game, whether it be about Wilcox's job security or where the program is at, and then we'll kind of just build our discussions off of that. So, Nam, I mean, you're the most vocal one, so you got to go first.
I resent that. It's just the same thing that I say when people find out that I'm like the English department head at my school. I'm just like, it just means I'm your paperwork jockey. Like, I just happened to be here first. So, long story short, I like Justin Wilcox. I rooted for Justin Wilcox like years ago. You can find me advocating for his hire on Twitter, but and also subsequently from the time before that, like not wanting him to get hired. So, you've seen the whole range. But my point is I think the program has peaked under him. I don't think that as much as I like him and wanted him to be successful, I'm not seeing really encouraging signs. And I think losing this week in the fashion that they did at homecoming against the worst team in the Pac-12, I can't tell you when they'll fire him or if they'll choose to do that because the AD is its own separate entity that does its own thing. But I think we're closer to the end than we are at the beginning at this point for him.
Okay. That's where Nam is. Nick's kind of nodding. So I know Nick is somewhere in the same vein. So Nick, what's your stance?
Well, so I'm worried I'm going to be long-winded here because there's sort of a whole lot of like context and background to like how you feel about college head coaches, right? But I could just sort of start by laying some groundwork here that my perspective on head coaches at the college level is that they receive so much compensation that by the nature of that compensation, they deserve a very heavy level of scrutiny. And I tried to look up the Justin Wilcox contract ahead of time, and of course it's confusing because he received an extension that like changed his amount of compensation. But like, so Cal hires him in before the 2017 season, they signed him to a 5-year contract that provides him with roughly $10 million in total compensation, plus a whole bunch of like incentives. You know, you get X number of bonus money for 7 wins and 8 wins and 9 wins and beating Stanford and beating UCLA and et cetera. To keep good grades, you get all this. But, so then he gets an extension after 2 years that like adds to his baseline compensation. I don't know how it changes his incentives. The bottom line is that so Justin Wilcox will, you know, he's going to be our head coach for the remainder of this year, certainly. Maybe Cal will keep him on. I don't know. He'll have coached at Cal for 5 years and gotten well in excess of $10 million in total compensation. I don't know how much higher than it is. I know that it's at least $10 million and more than that, certainly. If we're going to be compensating somebody that much money from a public institution, I think it's important. Like, it's not just fair to ask. I think it's necessary to ask, are we getting fair compensation for that? I don't feel a whole lot of sympathy, you know, in these sort of situations. And I think when you look at his record, ultimately, I think the answer is no, that Cal hasn't gotten the football performance that they expect from that level of monetary investment.
I think that's fair. But Nick's just starting off his take. So that's the groundwork.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I can dive in, you know, as we continue our conversation about like aspects of that performance, like where we think that, you know, because my opinion is that he hasn't reached that level of performance. But we, you know, getting into why I believe that and why others might disagree, that's probably where the real meat of the conversation is. But like, I want to start from the standpoint of we give these people a whole crap ton of money, and you got to deliver. If you know, like the aspect of the job here is that you're going to get heavily criticized because you get that money. In fact, the criticism is part of it, because the reason we criticize is because we care. We wouldn't be getting all this money if we didn't care. Our caring leads to the money.
Fair enough. Andy, where do you lay on the spectrum?
So post Washington State, and just to reset a little bit, stoked to have you guys on. Excited for this conversation. Shout out to Shavit, who is a Twitter follower who asked for this to happen, and shout out to you guys for making it happen. I think my post-Washington State self, if I'm being totally honest with you guys, I didn't care about the Cal game at all. I had probably one of the worst sports days I could think of, with the Giants losing 3-2, and then having to sit through, after watching that at the press box, thanks to Rob, then having to sit through the remaining 2.5 quarters of Cal football. I was just like, screw it. Like, whatever, sports, I'm done with you. And today's much better. Wonderful. So I'm in a much different headspace than I was maybe yesterday. But I think when I heard you do the intro, Rob, you were like, yeah, like maybe there's, or was it Robert Nam? This is not a good start for me. But there was a sentiment of, there's fans that maybe just sort of look at it passively and interact with the state of the program on a more passive level. And it was one of those things where I kind of like, I kind of am still in that state. So I just looked at it and was like, all right, well, it's just another loss. And I know it's not. I know how bad Washington State is. I know what the expectations were behind this game. And I understand the implications of, you know, what this game means in the greater context of for Wilcox and his career. But this season has just been such a I don't know, classic Cal season. You guys are gonna kill me for saying that. Where
I don't disagree.
And we've said it, we've said it consistently on this podcast. Like, I said it and I stand by it. Like, we could lose every single game from here on out, and I wouldn't call for Justin Wilcox to be removed as head coach. And I'm very firm on that, because I just feel like in this day and age, what happens is there's a tendency to chase something better. And when you chase something better, what you end up doing is you reset more so than actually achieve what you're chasing. And it means, and I maybe it's basketball and just going through that. And like Nick, what you were talking about, I'm like, yeah, we gave White King 5 years, $1 million a year. No one gave him any criticism for the first couple of years because he wasn't really well paid. Like, that was it's a great point. And so it made me sort of reconsider that position. But I think overall, where I've been at with this is that I believe that, as frustrating as the season has been, that Wilcox is as competitive as they come. He understands the game exceptionally well on both offense and defense, in my opinion, from what I've seen from him, from being able to have a little bit of extra access to hear how he thinks, how he, considers things. And I just think we're in a nascent stage of what could be a pretty competitive program. And I still think there's a case to be made that it's a competitive program this year. Like, we're still playing competitive football, as abysmal as that offense was. And as frustrating as that was to see, like, defense played well. Thought the defense gave us, and we can get into that, but there were just a couple of times, more than enough opportunities for any normal offense to be able to go out there and, adjust to what Washington State was doing and win that game. We just didn't do it. And the biggest knock that I have on Wilcox right now is it looked like the guys gave up. Like, full stop. It looked like the players were out. And if he loses the locker room, this becomes a much harder argument. That's it.
Well, I certainly will agree that if you told me ahead of the game that we would allow 21 points, I'd say, "Oh, sweet, we're gonna cover." The offensive performance following three pretty solid outputs in the last 3 games is really flabbergasting. Which I think kind of feeds into a lot of people sort of being like, what, flabbergasting performances, like things that we like just can't be analyzed in my mind, like the offensive line playing like that. There's no framework that I can come up with to explain why that happens with like the evidence that we've had this season with those same players in the past, is I think partly what feeds into a lot of people's frustration with the current regime. Like, shouldn't there be a certain level of consistent performance at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very valid.
Nam, do you have are you adding to this discussion? You're like sitting there and you're processing everything that's being said.
I'm thinking very deeply, and it's a very different pace of like Cal football conversation than I usually have, right? Like, this is very talk showy, so like I'm pondering carefully the magnitude of my response. I can't tell, like I'm not privy to like the locker room dynamics, but I can imagine that Wilcox definitely entered this year like with some high level of sway. Like, you can't bring that many guys back. Pitching them on the idea that we're ready to compete this year without that, right? Like, so we can assume that definitely happened. If you're 1-4 into that season now, and you might not make even the Boca Raton Bowl or whatever it is, and you like might have to scrap for that. Like, I think it's easy to envision the situation holding or getting worse, and it's a lot harder for me to imagine some sort of substantive turnaround that would and I'm not saying like they might win 3 more games like after the stretch, right? When I say substantive turnaround, like if they're suddenly a bowl team, that's harder for me to see at the moment. So like I don't know when they'll act, but I feel like, I don't know, if it's a different unit every week being responsible, except the special teams, which is frequently responsible, like I don't know if he's the guy that we want doing this job right now, even if it pertains to like rebuilding, because fans might stop coming and things like that. There's all kinds of those things to factor into.
Well, so I think the point you made about 2019 is something that I wanted to get into a little bit, because so I was trying to remember, like you mentioned, we're bringing a lot of guys back from a 2019 that went 8-5, maybe with better Garber's injury luck. They might have been even better than that. You know, not going to guess on a precise win total, but you know, if things swing right, maybe that team wins 10 games. It's possible. We guys that we have lost off of that 2019 team: Evan Weaver, Cam Bynum, Michael Safell,
Davis,
Jalen Hawkins,
Ashton Davis. So
Trevion
Beck. So we've lost a decent number of guys.
4 NFL guys.
Yeah. But we've also brought a lot of guys back. You know, like there was a reason that we were so excited about 2020 before COVID destroyed it all. And we haven't lost a ton of guys that were supposed to be contributors in 2020 that then left before 2021, Cam Bynum being the obvious example. And I guess what concerns me about the trajectory of the Wilcox program, presuming it continues, is all of the guys that Wilcox and his staff inherited and turned into plus contributors are graduating, and Cal is struggling to replace pretty much all of them. Cam Bynum's cornerback spot has been a major problem area for the defense. Both middle linebacker slots, replacing Weaver and Kunasik, have been major problem areas. You know, like Brett Johnson, to be fair, is one of their recruits, but you know, it's clear that Cal's struggling without him. Coin Dang is injured. There's been very few cases where Cal has lost a guy, whether to the NFL graduation or to injury, where the guy filling in has stepped in and replaced that production or even exceeded that production. And so at a certain point, the coaching staff is going to have guys step in to replace that production, or we're just going to keep slowly backsliding. And that, you know, it speaks to something that's going on at the recruiting level in terms of talent analysis, or maybe more likely talent development that should be happening but is not. But that's what I find confusing and intriguing about this team, is that I think we all sort of agreed that Wilcox was recruiting at least as good as Sonny Dykes and maybe upgrading the level of recruiting. So if that is in fact the case, and I believe it to be the case, why is Cal having so much trouble replacing the stalwarts who were so successful earlier in Wilcox's tenure?
I think that's a fair point. I think Andy and I talked about this actually a couple of weeks ago or was it last week? We were talking about GA's departure, right? And this thing that Cal fans have right now with this like yearning for GA to come back. But my
GA's
point,
not coming back, people.
He's not. The point I was trying to make with that discussion, though, was that people think he would have been the savior for this class, but people also forget that his recruiting wasn't that great. We whiffed on a lot of defensive backs targets while he was here. And all of the guys that he brought in are the sophomores and juniors, like the redshirt sophomores and the redshirt juniors that are currently a part of that room. But all of them have been leapfrogged by guys like Colin Gamble and Lou Hearns. And so, like, I don't know if that's a good enough argument here that it would have been better if GA was here. I mean, coaching, of course, is the X factor here, but that's kind of what Nick was talking about, and like I'm continuing on that point, is like, yeah, it's true. Like, our recruiting has been better, but the guys that have been brought in haven't replaced that production or stepped even to that next level of what we expected with that level of recruiting, right? And Andy was tweeting about that earlier today about, or was it in that thread, Andy, that didn't explode, about the number 3 recruiting class in the conference?
Yeah.
So I mean, Andy can talk about that, but I think it plays hand in hand.
I think think one of the shifts that happened to me is you look at the team that you inherited, and they, at least defensively, the fundamentals on defense, it seemed like we needed to have really good coaches, and we opted for coaches who can skill up rather than for coaches that can recruit. And what we have shifted towards in the last 1 to 2 years, in my opinion, are coaches that are recruiters first, coaches second. And I think it just shows right now. It's like, and though we're seeing that slip, and I just don't think maybe is something, maybe that's a miss that Wilcox just completely, that I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at that and said, we need to recruit better. Recruiting is going to get us to the next level. But in so doing, you continue to pull on coaches that are less credible at actually the execution. And what we've seen is even him in this press conference where Wilcox normally comes into those pretty heated, as you guys know. It's not always the most fun for us, but he just seemed down, borderline depressed, and that's totally understandable. I mean, it's got to be a tough season. Like, you tear your Achilles and all of this, that's a tough injury, and to do all of this on top of it can't be easy. But I don't know if I've ever seen him that way. And I think that, Rob, what you're alluding to basically is the point that I was making and still have a lot of belief in, is that every single thing that you guys said is valid, as of course it is. But I think as we look at recruiting, for me, it's like you brought in that class, and Nick, you're talking about these guys that are stepping up to fill those gaps. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to say his last name.
Antelatos. Antelatos.
That was our Evan Weaver 2.0, right? That was a guy we really liked and lost him for the year in fall camp. And then we lose Coin Dang, who, last year came on slow, but then started to have a really, he was starting to have really good games by the time that season finished, all 4 games of it. And for me, those, and then the Brett Johnson loss. So you lost your best player on the D line, your best linebacker, and the other linebacker that you thought was going to step into a major role. And then on top of it, we're looking worse in the secondary than expected. And, he's been frustrated with his coaches there. But it's just I look at that and I'm like, all right, well, where are recruits coming in? They're coming in on the D line. And I think for that, the class where we had, the 3rd overall class in the Pac-12, that's all right. Anyways, the 3rd overall class of the Pac-12 is going to be there's a lot of skill positions mixed in there, and not a ton of those guys are necessarily have seen the field yet. The class that we're going to bring in is going to be very defensive line focused. And so my question to kind of both Nam and Nick would be, can you take me through the harm in waiting to see what those classes do by keeping it consistent versus changing up the entire regime?
Do you want to take this, or do you want me to take this? No, it's one, because we often share the singular brain cell through which we express these points. I get the impulse, right, to let the coaches see their guys through, and it's very likely that if there's a next really good Cal team, it's gonna be those guys you mentioned, right? The guys who are already here. And I understand that we want to see that go through, but if one, right, it's the most potential, you don't just keep a coach who can't do or develop or any of that. One, trusting him to do that again with that group of recruits that pretty much universally everybody agrees is among the best set of Cal players to walk through here, development, fingers crossed, right? If he's failing at that currently, I don't see the value of having him stick around when you could have other coaches. 2, you risk some stuff in the transition of that. I get that, but the overall health of the program can't be held hostage to 1 or 2 groups of recruits. As brilliant and as we think that they're going to be, I think first and foremost, like, if you've already shifted in this direction and you like giving him the opportunity to continue to hire coaches that look, I have some very mild Jeep Chris like reservations because I ran the numbers and he's never developed any tight end of note like in his career. And that's who you have at your tight ends position, right? Like it's things like this that make me not want to give him that. And there's certainly talent here, but that doesn't entitle him to be the one who gets to coach it.
I think the other thing that I'm a little bit worried about, like, Andy, I think you're entirely accurate that I think as Wilcox has been like replacing assistant coaches who were with him initially, that he was really specifically looking to try to upgrade on recruiting. And I was pretty like pleased with that direction.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
My concern is that if we hire guys to recruit, but the on-field performance is so bad that they can't recruit, like we've already lost a couple of commits, and that doesn't tell the whole story of the class. There's still so much time. Who knows what the class will end up looking like? But like right now, we double check the numbers on the 247 composite. Cal is ranked 7th in the Pac-12, which is good, but also not super great because like Arizona State and Washington State are both like committing recruiting suicide with their off-field stuff. So like we're almost ahead of them by default. We're ahead of Washington, but we're behind them on like average recruit ranking. We're like, right now recruiting for the 2022 class is not going super well. And if we brought in these guys to recruit, but they can't produce on the field and that kills the recruiting, then we're sort of like, the whole concept is DOA. And that would be another argument for like diminishing returns, and we need to make a change to try to salvage the direction of the program. It's a little unfair because like I said, we're in the middle of the recruiting cycle and who knows how it ends up. But like right now, Cal doesn't have a single 4-star signed. It's sort of standard average Cal class that we've gotten ever since Tedford left, which is fine, but like not something that would raise the ceiling of the program. I hope that changes, but we sort of have to meet the reality of how it is right now.
Andy, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think those are both. I think that's the only curiosity that I have is there anything that could happen on the recruiting front or on the field that would even change your mind? Or have you both kind of looked at this on your own and said, as far as my own belief about where this program can go, it's capped?
I mean, if Cal won out, then what would our record be then? We'd be 8-4. My sort of stance right now is, like I think what Rob said on Twitter earlier, as much as possible, I try to wait until the end of the season to make a decision. I think that's generally a good move. Wilcox has this habit of following up flabbergasting performances with really good performances. And so I don't think that it's fair to cast Washington State as reflective of his tenure. It's just one piece of data that's part of the entire tenure. But, so if you want to put that one piece of data in the context of the entire tenure, we're talking about a guy who's 11-22 in Pac-12 play. He's winning one of every 3 Pac-12 games. He's compensated, I think, roughly average in the conference, and he's producing below average results in the conference. So, it's kind of straightforward. There are 7 games left in the season for him to change the calculus of what he's produced. And, I'm going to show up on Saturdays and cheer and hope that he does. But when I see a coach who has produced the way he's produced over 5 years, I'm going to assume that he's going to continue to produce the way he's going to produce. So, he'll probably beat Arizona and Colorado and maybe pull an upset. And so that'd be 4-8. Maybe we'll go 5-7. But my stance sort of throughout the Wilcox tenure is we're a 6-6 team plus or minus a game based on random luck. And the hope was that we would finally puncture that we're a 500 team equilibrium. We got so close in 2019. And maybe if we had gotten a little bit of better injury luck, we might have. But at the same time, injuries happen, and their ability to overcome injuries is another factor in coaching. I think that's sort of the reality of the talent on hand. So I'm not necessarily willing to give him a pass because guys get hurt. Because guys get hurt on every team.
Just to my end of the question, if they can go 7-0, I'll probably turn some heads. If they make a bowl, I think what annoys me about that is one of the problems that I've had interpreting Wilcox's entire tenure this whole time is just how easy it is for us to rationalize and make excuses for certain things, right? The aforementioned injuries, replacing these coaches, the pandemic year, right? If they make a bowl again, we're ultimately we're running back the same story, right? We're waiting for him to show us one way or the other, despite, escalating financial investment and decreasing fan investment at the same time. So he would have to do something wildly surprising at this point. Recruiting is a function of on-field success. At least it's the part that you can certainly control the most. So at least in this class, I don't think that there's anything that they could do to sway my mind. And at this point in the cycle, with 2 months to go before National Signing Day, we're not involved with anybody that is, to my knowledge, at least talking to Trace and whatever, the guy who's supposed to know about this stuff. I don't think anything will change there, and which is a bummer because I would prefer for us to win with what we have with the same continuity because it's easier for emotional investment, right? But I think there comes a point when you have to accept that what you're seeing is what you're seeing, even when there are so many other factors involved. We cut him a lot of passes on a lot of things, right? The team was this close from going 0-4 last year. Put into some tough situations, yeah, but I don't blame anybody who arrived at this conclusion that he's not going to be the dude earlier than me. But I think myself and Nick sense just this was the point where we know he's not coming back all the way back from this, just with Sonny at Oregon State.
This is the point of no return. Fair enough. I think that's totally fair. Well, then I guess the question I would have to follow up with that is continuing that conversation, right? Is whenever we decide to move on, right? let's say it is this offseason, maybe it's next season, who knows? But if we play that scenario a little bit more, to what Andy was kind of alluding to as well, like what helps us move that needle, right?
It can get worse. It could get worse.
It can always get worse. But like, I don't want to like, we don't need to throw out names or anything like that. I'm just saying from a program like health standpoint and what we expect the program to be at, like, where is it for you guys? What is that next? Like, what are we trying to achieve with that coaching change is basically what I'm asking.
And to be clear, when I said it could get worse, what I mean by that is if Cal fires Justin Wilcox, they could absolutely hire somebody worse than Justin Wilcox. So I don't want to like discount that possibility. Speaking as a tortured Cal basketball fan, it can get worse. This is where I struggle with college sports generally, because if we're just talking about winning football games or winning games in whatever sport, there's a school of thought which is that you hire a guy, you give that person as much time as possible, or you give them only so much time as it takes to determine whether or not they are a person that can raise the level of your program. And as soon as you have enough data to say, oh, it turns out, darn, they weren't, we took a swing and missed, then get rid of them, bring in somebody new, and start that process over again until you find that person who's capable of raising the profile of your program. Which I have no dispute with the logic of that, but I also think it leads to the insane economy of the sport where we're throwing around millions of dollars to a bunch of people who only occasionally are actually worth that much just from a purely capitalistic perspective. While, all of the players are, hustling just to sign an endorsement deal with some sort of weird, like, supplement company.
Or a podcast.
Yeah. Well, hey, at least that's on the up and up. And
wait, are you guys signing somebody?
We have signed. We did.
Oh.
We signed Coin Dang. He is the voice of our intro.
I was not aware of this. It must have slipped across my Twitter feed. Congratulations.
Congratulations to
Coin.
Coin.
Yeah. So, like, I'm cognizant of the fact that, like, what we're advocating for is just throwing more money at the problem for a school that may not have that money. Of course, that's also an argument for, like, not extending Justin Wilcox after 2 years. Like, Cal has decided to play this game where we're paying millions of dollars to these guys. So if they're going to play that game, you may as well try to play it right. And if we're going to try to be competitive at football, then we should pay the money to try to be competitive at football. But I think we have enough data now to say that Justin Wilcox is very, very unlikely to be the guy to raise the profile of this program beyond, what it has been over the last decade. So, logic then dictates that it's time to move on to the next guy and give him a shot and see how it goes.
The nature of the program, like, if we're being realistic about our standing, like, there are a lot of institutional difficulties that make us, like, a step down from the most attractive job. Two, like, regardless of the resources, prestige, right? Like, you have certain things working in your favor, and there are certain things that don't. I think that understanding that calculus means that we're looking for a very particular type of candidate. Cal cannot, and I cannot believe that this was even thrown out there last hiring cycle. Like, we can't hire Les Miles, you guys. Like, there are certain institutional obstacles that prevent us from looking for that kind of established coach. Our best chance, right? Like, what we've seen, at least in the modern era, and I know that has only been able to be tested a few times as a hypothesis, but our best chance of finding a coach that can move that needle, you have to take a swing on somebody who is high variance. Like, you're betting on them to like if they don't come with the best credentials yet, like you're essentially hiring an up and comer. You're hoping that that is the thing that raises our profile. And from there, when that coach gets hired out by a bigger team, you're hoping that the infrastructure is there. Like, so it can be handed on a la Stanford, right? Like the Jim Harbaugh to David Shaw baton pass up until recently. And even then, like you got to double tap these dudes because like, I keep thinking that they're going to die and they just won't, right? Like I just I have some ideas and I know that people are going to do their research for this, but we're looking obviously like we know now that you can't discount like West Coast roots, so that restricts our pool a little bit. You got to have a person of character representing the university. Like you can't have somebody who's getting their assistant coaches fired for, soliciting hookers, as it were. And then like you got to have somebody who's up and coming and high variance. Like I think those are the three main factors. That's what led us to Tedford, and to some degree, that's what motivated Dykes, and I can understand that, and I can understand the hire for Wilcox too. Like there was nobody waiting to be successful in the 2013 like hiring cycle. We got Mike Mack and Bob Diaco was like our other people. Like, sometimes you're just gonna not get lucky, and it just dictates that we have to try again somewhere in the cycle. I'm just going to throw it out there. I was very impressed with what Troy Taylor's Sac State Hornets did against Cal. Obviously, Cal guy understands that dysfunction that is the athletic department. Like, I feel good about that. Like I'm just going to throw that out there. That's my first guess.
It's funny to talk about recruiting because I'm very much a recruiting, is the most important thing in college football. But I'm also coming around to the idea that the recruiting pecking order is now so stratified and set in stone that individual coaches just don't matter that much anymore. Like USC and Oregon are going to recruit ahead of Washington and UCLA, are going to recruit ahead of everybody else. And all of those are way below anybody from the SEC or the Big Ten. And it just doesn't matter who you hire. And I'm probably overreacting to like the national landscape, but if I am at all right about that, then maybe the attitude is whoever we hire is going to recruit at Cal as well as everybody else is recruiting at Cal, and we need to hire somebody who like has a proven record of developing talent and getting as much out of who he can bring on campus, because you're not going to get high 4-star, 5-star guys, except in rare circumstances, because like the Jaylen Brown types. And I don't know who that is, and I don't really trust the Cal athletic department to identify that person. But if we're talking about who would eventually succeed at Cal, that's sort of my guess as to a template.
Cal Twitter coaches Cal football. Like, please, just one game. Like, what is the worst that could happen?
We're going to have like a triple option that runs into an RPO and players glitching out because they're being told to run one way and then pass another direction. It's going to be mayhem.
Quarterback sneak on every play that's 2 yards to gain or less.
You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo or honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker out there, you can try spicy ghost pepper, only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. Listen, I'm going to dare you to do it. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs that you already love. Pick a flavor. Grab some extra napkins and then grab a few more napkins and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's.
I mean,
that is what I wanted on the 4th down play, or the 3rd and 1. But then we went with the toss, of course, because it always works.
Yeah, I may have had some 4-letter words in the stands when that happened.
That was I think there's one coach that would possibly I'd reverse my stance on, and there's only one, and he'll never do it, and that's it. And there's Chris Peterson. He's the only one. If he was interested in this job and he wanted to have a nondescript, no pressure environment, because what you guys were talking about, which is like, 6-6, I think Rob and I have said, if we're like, I have definitely said this, if we're making a bowl game every year, I'm fine. I don't care. We can go 7-5 every single year and we're in a bowl. I'm fine with it. We'll probably have some fun along the way. We'll probably be pissed about we could have been better. But at the end of the day, that was really what I was okay with. And I looking at Nam's reaction right now and just
I just okay, like 7-5 every year. Does that like literally mean seven? Like like a real monkey's paw situation? Like you can never ever exceed 7 wins, or is it like a 7-win consistently? Like challenge once in a while? Like
Yeah,
I
right. Utah,
like
that type of feel.
Utah, yeah, we use Utah a lot as like the benchmark.
Yeah, if we could do that. But the problem is, at least in the 10 years in which I've written about this team, and I know, Nick, I think you're probably somewhere in that same range too. Like, we've watched a lot of football, and the team hasn't even been there. And then I think about how frustrating it is to watch 7-5 / like barely razor thin, like, margins that even allow them to get that far. And like, I don't know if that's what I want with the rest of my life, like unless if I'm at least as a closely engaged fan of the program, like I wouldn't want to experience only that. I would hope for some consistency, but every so often like to vary into the good range. Like I wouldn't have a problem with that, but just 7-5 football isn't always fun. Like
I will throw out there.
No, 7-5.
I think it. In terms of your mental health and life enjoyment, that if you can derive joy out of 6-6, 7-5 football, you are a well-adjusted person, and I would not advise you to change that mindset because we're going to get a lot of that.
Envy you so much. Yeah, like just okay. Let's use the Giants as a, and it's hard to say, right? Because 3 of us in here are Giants fans, and we've seen 3 World Series, and we didn't even think that would ever happen. Sorry, Rob. Actually, you're not sorry. Fuck you, because you won one at our expense.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
backing up, right? Like, if we said that the Giants would always win 80-something games, right, which is like 85 games, and they might go to the playoffs sometimes, and they might not. For the rest of your life, are you satisfied with that?
But like, you got to understand, the Giants are a professional team, and Cal is my college team, and so like, I think it's not a 1-to-1 type of situation. So you look at Cal for me, it's like, look, at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, you'd love to see the program take that next step, but it's just sort of like, I've used this, I've talked about this a couple of times, like Gary Patterson's record at TCU is the perfect example of what tenure can do. They went 4-8, like 4-8. I'm sure fans were screaming for him to get fired. It was their first 2 years coming into the Big 12. They go like 5-7 and 4-8, and that they keep it consistent with him. He does. What does he do? Defensive based teams, like basically this entire time, and over time they've had success to the point where it looks like a tenure that I would take. And like 7-5 sucks. I've said that the whole year. Like when we lost our first couple games, I was like, guys, these losses, when I predict 7 wins, the 5 losses are going to hurt. You know it every year. And yes, it's super hard to go through it because you want something that's better. But to me, the foundation of what Utah was, particularly when I was working with the team, when we were playing them in the bowl game in 2009, is, on the back of their equipment bus, they had all their bowl wins. And their reputation and the brand they built behind that was, we don't lose bowl games. And that's how Utah moved from that small program into being brought into the Pac-12, was they built it on the back of seasons where they weren't always, when they were in the smaller conference, they were better, but they built basically a sustainable program by not necessarily reaching beyond that. And I think that's what I'm saying here, is that the core of what I want Cal to be is competitive year in, year out. And competitive means you might have a year like this year where we could get 3 wins. That's it. Like, we could have 4 wins. But that doesn't mean that next year we couldn't flip that and win 8. And that's the bargain that I make. And then the intangibles come in. Like, is he a class act? Is it somebody that graduates their players? Is it somebody that seemingly cares about their players' well-being? Those 3 sort of take it to the point where I say, yeah. Like, and that's why I can't compare it to the Giants, because we're not talking about like graduating baseball players. Like, these are professional athletes, right? And I think that's what's so interesting about Nick's point is that the way you look at it analytically with the money tied in is absolutely something that wasn't in my perspective. And I think that that's something that is really valid. I just never really thought about it that way. But if I was looking at the Giants, Nam, to your point, like, hell yeah. I'd be like, dude, you guys are paid millions. I was yelling at Evan Longoria this weekend. Evan Longoria and Chris Bryant. You know, it's like, you guys are paid millions of dollars to do this. I just think that there are intangibles that exist in college football outside of just the product on the field that have helped me get to that mindset where you guys might say I have a good mindset, but I would challenge you on that and say I definitely do not.
It's really interesting.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, it's like, I've not really thought about it in your terms because I don't have any attachment to a pro football team. So Cal is essentially like a pro football unit, at least in terms of the way that I root for them. You know, like, there is something to be said for being a consistently competitive team, which we haven't or have verged upon being for the last 10 years. But with our institutional investment like increasing and the money that's at stake and the stadium that you have to pay off, like, I think there has to be a level of ambition that's above that. Not to say that like being consistently competitive isn't important, but they got to start swinging for the fences because, you know, the reason why like Dykes eventually had to go was like they had a season ticket renewal rate of like 30%. And I don't know what we're looking at like next year yet, because there's still a little bit of season left to be played, but finances do dictate some of that. And also, fairly or unfairly, we are all children of the Jeff Tedford era. Some of us like directly because you went to school during that, and me like growing up thinking that such a thing was possible, right? Like, I think if you look at Cal football in the long view of 6 decades, like the last 6 decades of, you know, mostly middling, non-competitive like programs, I think it's easy to have that view when you're like, well, football is not essential to how I understand the university, versus the generation of voices that is currently, you know, for better or for worse, sorry everybody, shaping the discourse. Like, we do have some right, maybe that's not the right word, we do have that expectation though of being something, because we've seen a summit before, and that's, for better or for worse, like what we know we can chase.
I think the thing here is it's all valid. Like Andy's point for me, like as a fan of professional sports, it's like whatever team I root for, it's championship or bust. There's no moral middle ground. Like, the only other thing is, like, if, you know, for Nam and for Nick, who are Spurs fans, God bless your soul, and for me as a United fan,
why did I not listen to you guys when I willingly like chose this life, and now I get to live the same misery twice a weekend?
I told you, but Nick's dancing for those who are listening on the pod. But the reason I bring that up is, like, you know, at least in you know, Premier League soccer or European soccer, like, you have the ultimate goal of trying to win a championship, but you also have the secondary goal of trying to make European soccer. So getting in the 4th place, that's not bad. I think what Andy's trying to get at with collegiate sports is that's that second tier, right? We're not going to pull a Leicester City one year, right? We're not just going to come into the league, be a middling team one year, and then the immediate following year, like, be in like a tight race to win a championship. It rarely happens, those Cinderella runs. So in order for you to get to that part, that second step is consistently being or playing European football. And that the comparison here is that we need to be consistently playing bowl games. And that's one of the things under Tedford, right, that people forget is we were consistently playing bowl games. And that's what led to, you know, the other factors we talked about, the extra practices, right? That plays a huge part in leading into that. And just the exposure, because everyone's watching all those bowl games because there's only so many that happen every day. And your brand grows.
The Cheez-It Bowl has altered our brand like forever in the college football consciousness. Yeah, you can't pay for that kind of PR, guys.
You can't. You absolutely can't. So I think Andy's point is valid, but I also think Nam's point's perfectly valid too. Like, we just can't set our sights on merely going to a bowl game every year. I think that next step is where we want to get to as a program, because ultimately, if you root for the Warriors, right? Or like most of you guys are Warriors fans, initially just wanted to get to the playoffs. And then you guys started vying for championships. And then it was like, I want that next championship. I want that next championship. It's beyond the playoffs. And we need to get to that point. But I think it's the view that all of us have that are different is the means to get to that point. Like, ultimately, all of us want to get to where we're vying for championships, right? Whether that be Pac-12 championships or national championships, it doesn't matter which championships, but we're vying for championships. But it's is this guy that'll get us to that point in the next 5 to 8 years, or do we need to make a change to get another guy that might get us to that point in the next 5 to 8 years? And that's kind of like where we sit. That's where our positions are on this spectrum.
I want to respond real quick to 2 items that Andy brought up. One thing I do want to mention is I don't want this to just be dumping on Justin Wilcox hour. Like you mentioned, sort of like how he's led the program and he's an upstanding guy and hasn't been any real controversies, at least that I'm aware of. And one thing I do want to mention in praise of him, and this might be a low-level thing, but it matters a lot to me, is that Cal athletes have taken a real leadership position in the Pac-12 United movement and the college football unionization movement. And I don't really know what Justin Wilcox's position is on that, but I just can't help but assume that because his players have felt comfortable stepping into that role and have remained contributors on the team that are valued, and that he at least doesn't in any way hinder that the way a lot of coaches around the country have done. And that's, maybe I'm setting a low bar here, but I just know that a lot of guys are dicks about it. Nick Rolovich.
Nah, I agree with what. First of all, it's like within the spirit of like our institution, right? Like this streak of activism. Like, so I'm really glad that you brought that point up, because that's something that I haven't really thought about for a long time. With Wilcox, that's an excellent thing. Sorry, I just wanted to chime in agreement there. You had a second thing.
It's so like I don't want to discount what Justin Wilcox does well, and message to the Cal admin that's not listening to this podcast is that if you do decide to fire Justin Wilcox and move in a different direction, that let's continuing to support players in those sort of regards should be like a baseline expectation, the same way that graduating players is now a baseline expectation. The other point that you made, like talking about Kyle Whittingham and Gary Patterson and how those programs made the transition to the P5 level, and their administrations were very patient with them. The one thing that they had going for them is sort of like a kind of proof of concept. And to be fair, like they had maybe more of a G5 proof of concept where they had these spectacular G5 years. And it's not necessarily the same thing as doing it at a P5 level. But like, I think that's the one thing that we're struggling with Justin Wilcox, is that he hasn't had that 1 year that's sort of like the proof that he can do it. And that doesn't mean he can't, but we have 5 years and we don't yet have that proof. And I really wish he had given us that proof. And I hope he still does. I'm just skeptical of it ever happening. And actually, a slightly separate point, I often wonder, being a blogger and writing about the team and kind of having to think about it, I wonder how much that skews my perspective, because I've become this odd combination of cynical but immune at the same time, where like I have this expectation of the program that's quite low, but I'm also okay with it because it's just like, it is what it is now. I'm used to it. And if they give me something more, then that's great. I'll celebrate it.
The life
and
of
it
a
might be the
Cal
last
fan.
4 years of Cal men's basketball, but it's like, I know what I'm getting into when I watch this, and I'm going to hope for good things. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to take a shower and get on with my day and come back and root for him tomorrow.
Yeah, we see Nick with that TV in the background. That's the couch of misery that he sits down and watch Cal basketball every day during the season. A box of popcorn and just, I got to write about this game now. Wonder what this one gives me.
I think for me, the proof of concept was 2019. And now I find myself being like, okay, the thing that I think, Nick, that you talked about is like those teams had an identity. And the thing that's frustrating about this year is we just don't have any consistent identity. 1 week we're good on offense. The next week we're not. 1 week we're kind of good on defense. But like, I guess we've been somewhat more consistent there. We've just been average. But, it's just hard to, I think early in the Wilcox era, you knew who we were. We weren't going to blow you out, but holy shit, we were going to play sound, fundamental defensive football. And maybe because we've been chasing offense for so long and looked at that as if we just had offense, we've lost sight of that identity. And I think that's an issue going forward. And the other thing is, because we've shifted so far that direction, it then says like, what possible changes could we make that then put us in a position to be more successful next year? And I think that's the thing that trips me up, because I don't know. I'm not sure a lot of these coaches are pretty new to the program. So if you're going to make a move, it's going to be pretty indicative of a big hiring miss. And so I think that just becomes a huge question going forward, is how do you adjust? The other thing I want to talk to you guys about is like Rob, I'm speaking for you here because we've talked about it the last two pods. So if I'm wrong, just jump in and be like, you're wrong. But we don't think there's any chance that this administration lets Wilcox go. He was critical in the hire of Knowlton, and at the end of the sorry, not forever, but at the end of this year, even at the very worst, I could literally see the season going 1-11 or whatever, and I think that would maybe force them to take a look at it. But like 3-9, I just think it's probably a conversation with the athletic director about how do we turn this thing around. I'm curious if you guys feel the same way, or just to get your thoughts.
So my take here, and I've talked to Peter and other guys about this, I think all college football coaches and professional football coaches get this one like buy one more year card, which is scapegoat your coordinators and buy yourself one more year. Every head coach plays that card at least once.
Harbaugh just did it. Yeah. Harbaugh just did it.
Wilcox hasn't used that card yet, right? He did get a lot of years out of that card. So that card hasn't been played yet. Whether that card gets played or not, I don't know. But also, Nick, I know you and Peter were having this discussion. I don't want to steal away from your guys' podcast, but I mean, if you're the AD, you're looking at this, right? And let's say this football team goes 1-11. Do you honestly have the finances to, and let's say basketball tanks this year too, right? And Knowlton said at Mark Fox's presser that he usually gives his coaches 3 years to figure out whether, and that's when he knows whether he has a good coach or not. And if this year tanks under Fox, that's year 3. And year 3 for Wilcox was actually a pretty good year. So my point is, if both seasons tank, do we have the finances to get rid of both? Like, we might have to push one off, right? And the likelihood that basketball is going to be bad is very, very high.
I'm hella depressed right now. I don't follow basketball at all, but to know that it's suddenly like an impact into like the football like thing, this is deeply depressing, Rob. Like, I just want
you
you.
Understand where I'm coming from, right? Like it's
I do,
yeah.
right? Like money is a finite thing in this community, right? Be due to the powers that be.
You're going to be
like,
asking the same donors to paying the buyout of both basketball and
shit,
football.
Man,
it's not possible. I don't think it's possible.
So
right?
I don't want to get into a basketball discussion, but let's suffice to say that the ability of Cal men's basketball to make money outside of whatever we get automatically from like the media
TV
contract
revenue
has been murdered over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
It just has. I'm not happy about it. I don't like saying it. I feel like a dick saying it, but that's just the reality. And so I don't think the athletic department is going to chase, good money after bad on men's basketball. Maybe they'll let that contract expire. Maybe, by the time it's like year 4, it's not that much money. Maybe some donor will cover it. Basketball is dead as a revenue program right now. Maybe that'll change in 5 years. I don't know. Football is a completely different thing where, like, there's the talent on the roster that, if deployed correctly by the current coaching staff or the next coaching staff, could be good and could, get people to show up at Memorial Stadium and make more money. And so there's a whole lot more Cal fans, donors that care about football than care about basketball. And so I don't think that the men's basketball program directly impacts the football decision, other than that it's a part of the landscape of the athletic department that's generally struggling. Maybe a more interesting question is what the men's basketball hire that Knowlton made 2 years ago, what does that say about his ability to handle a change in the football department? And that's maybe a scarier conversation.
just real quickly on this question then, like, I hope we don't have to find out, right? Like, I hope we don't have to, like, sit here and ponder the reality of a 1-11 season or a 3-9 season. Like, I hope, right, like, that we can win with just what we have, because I do that, right? Like, that's that weird, like, blogger fan thing that me and Nick and Peter and everybody has to deal with. Is like, at the end of the day, we want positive results for the program. It is not fun to sit here to hash out and relitigate like what these various dilemmas that are going on. Like, we want to win, okay? It is fun to deal with winners. And I hope that we don't have to have that conversation. I can't honestly profess to think about what they'll do or not. But like, I hope that it straightens itself out. I just think that sooner or later, if it's not this year, whether he's safe, carte blanche, and arguably he already has done the coordinator thing because he had to get rid of Bo, right, for Musgrave. TDR also was got rid of. Like, he didn't do it in the way that, oh, like, I'm going to fire all my coordinators and reshuffle the staff in the same year. But arguably, like, we've already had that transition. Almost all of the staff has rolled over in some degree. I don't personally put as much weight behind that. Like, we've seen him hire with some effectiveness, but maybe not in the last cycle yet. So I don't know if he's safe this year. I couldn't project either way, but I hope I don't have to think about this more. I hope they just win 7 in a row.
Well, I mean, we've been talking for an hour already. I don't know if we have more to talk about in this regard. Like, we can go into more hypotheticals, but that's not good for anyone's headspace, not for any four of us. So I guess the final question to all of you guys is, like, what is, I guess it's the simple answer. Like Nam just said, we go 7-0. you're okay with that, and we push the decision out for another year, and we'll talk about it this offseason, and we'll recollect ourselves, basically, right? And it's that'd be hilarious for Nam's like final year writing, and his like final thing is, we'll decide next year. Like there's no like
again.
Again.
Right? Like, just if I have to spend the last year of myself blogging and have that like be a terrible team, then fine. At least I can say all right, I took you guys through two chapters. Like this is my shift, right? Like my
night's watch has ended.
Yeah, like I think he can get as safe as 4-8. I think for sure if he's wins at least 4 games, I feel really good that they'll make that.
They'll keep him.
Yeah.
It's just a point to clarify.
Yeah.
Nam, was 2013 your first year blogging?
In the technical sense of speaking, yes. Like basically 2012, 2013, like starting to do like a ridiculous long column on Mondays. Yeah, like 2013 basically.
I think the odds of Cal going 1-11 are exceedingly low. I don't know if I don't want to say it would be poetic if you started and ended at 1-11.
I hate you.
He just put that bad juju just into the universe. He just did it.
Yeah, we want to talk about bad juju. Like everything associated with websites I've written for, we destroyed the Tedford era. We started right for California and kicked off a global pandemic, and then went premium in time for the destruction of the Wilcox era. I probably have more blood on my hands than anybody else in this on this podcast right now.
It is great. It is great when we get people tweeting at us about like the coaches and like what needs to be done. Like Nam liked my tweet that I put out last night. Like when people tweet at us about this, I was like, I don't know what you guys expect us to do. Like we don't have any say. Like I'm the one at most of those pressers, and I'm pretty sure none of the coaches actually know what my name is. So like
out damn spot. Out damn spot.
So it's just one of those things. I was like, I don't know what I get. You're trying to like you voice your opinion, but like tweeting at me or Andy or Nam or at Nick or putting us all into a single tweet like doesn't really do much. Like we're always also texting and talking to each other. That it's like we're already discussing everything. Not everything that we discuss will put up on the internet, but like we're talking about it, and it influences some of my, at least for me, it influences some of my takes and approaches to football. But it is hilarious, especially in these types of circumstances. I think it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious. We're all just smiling at each other. I think this is a good way to end the pod. This is the perfect way to end the pod. Well, thanks Nam and Nick for joining. Of course, Nick, Monday Columns, also the Bear Market, the premium podcast of Redford, California. So you can subscribe there, do all that stuff. Nam, of course, the novel on Sundays. Beautifully poetic, this novel this week. I loved it.
Stop.
I loved it.
You're embarrassing me. Thanks, guys.
Is there an actual novel coming? Is it just a single page novel, or is it an actual novel?
I'm on the way. On the way.
You know what? Honestly, Nam, you should do is you should find every single novel you've ever written, right? Cal football novel, and just compile it into a 7-year book, like just with the dates of every single one, and just put it out as like a Shea Serrano PDF. It's like $5. Here's my collection of all of the, and people can read it and just relive every single Cal like football moment over the last 9 years ish.
Yeah, 10 years. Yeah. Listen, if you're a sick, depraved individual, come see me then. But like, that's not a project I'm directly like actively pursuing.
I was gonna say, you can note it in like a footnote. Here's when my soul fled my body. Here's the second time my soul fled my body.
Here's the date that never returned. Yeah, we're that meme, right? The sicko, like at the window, just waiting. But Nam has the novel on Sundays. Also, you can find him on Rivals with the Crepe podcast with him and Trace. Great podcast if you want the insider scoops with recruiting and actually a little bit more in-depth stuff compared to what Andy and I do, which is we just fling stuff and see what sticks. So but I lied. We have a lot of fun. But Andy and I, of course, you're listening to the California Golden Bearcast, and that's it all. As always, go Bears.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.